Welcome to The Intentional Way, where literally every moment is a step towards purposeful living. I'm Bryan Hatch, here to explore the power of intention with you. Learn from our guests who embody intentionality. I'm glad you're here with me. Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of The Intentional Way. I'm your host, Bryan Hatch, and I'm really excited to have another guest here today. I'm excited about each one of our guests because of the way they live their lives or what they do professionally that has us learn from their intentionality. And today is no different. We have a special marriage and family therapist. His name is Mike Morgan, and I'm really excited for you guys to learn about how he lives intentionally. So welcome to the show, Mike. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. As I get started, I always like to learn a little more about people in a way that isn't so easy. You know, people can look up your site, come see you at your office and your practice. What's something people don't know about you that would be kind of intriguing or interesting as we start off?
I think what people wouldn't see is probably an impressive, not impressive thing is I've dabbled in professional pickleball. I'm a sponsored pickleball player, probably the most minimal sponsorship you could have, but been playing pickleball before the boom happened probably 4 or 5 years ago, back before tennis players took over the sport. But yeah, I've been playing pickleball for almost a decade now, and that's kind of how I make a ton of new friendships and now do it more for fun, but it's been a fun journey.
That's cool. I've never met a sponsored pickleball player, so this is an honor for me. You've been playing it for a decade. Are you doubles, singles? What do you do?
Most of pickleball is doubles.
Mhm.
So most of what I do, if you really want to work out, play singles. But a lot of people, it's kind of like badminton, where more people play doubles than singles. But yeah, sorry to make you feel inferior. I know the prowess of being a sponsored pickleball player is, makes people feel uncomfortable. So sorry to put that on you.
Yeah, it's going to be awkward from this moment on. I'm sure of that.
Really intimidating presence that I bring.
But do you play not just for fun, but when do you play tournaments? Is that often? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly?
How often do I compete?
Yeah.
Probably compete a few times a year at this point. Probably every quarter they'll have local money ball tournaments now where people just put in money and play for money. They shifted to where if you want to play professionally, you have to have a professional contract and be on the tour, traveling 30 weeks a year. And with my career and with my family where I am in life, it just wasn't really viable. Plus, skill level, it's there, but not quite there. So anyway, it was a decision I had to make 4 or 5 years ago of how in depth did I want to go competing wise. But it's a grieving process though, when you develop a skill and then have to let it go a little bit. But I know a lot of the professional players or played against them and I root them on, and it's a fun thing to do, and supporting them too.
And you've beat your fair share of those traveling players, yeah?
Historically, I think they take it to me at this point. But I'm a good sparring partner. Anytime they're in town, hopefully I can get the invite and get tagged by them a few times by some power shots and make them feel better about themselves.
It's good to have something that we are good at that we can compete in. I think it's healthy for most people to have something to compete in. And that's cool. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. It's been a fun ride. There's a book called The Inner Game of Tennis.
Okay.
But he says there's different types of games that people like to play. And one is compete-o and one is fun-o. And so it's interesting to shift from compete-o to fun-o.
What's the O?
The O is like the name of the game. I don't know. Plinko.
All right.
He's trying to make it catchy, I guess.
Okay. So but you still compete, but it's not as frequent as it used to be.
Yeah, if I were, because there's a lot of local tournaments, like there's the local Kaysville, Utah City pickleball tournament that I think I could do okay in. So I don't necessarily want to like go and try to punish on beginners or something like that. And so if I were to compete, I would want to compete at the highest level. So it was just like a grieving thing of like, oh, that's not really going to be a thing. So anyway.
It's not. Yeah. So why was it a grieving process? Why was that so tough on you?
Because we kind of got to the point where a cluster of our friends were, I think, ranked. There's different types of rankings, but I think we were all right around 20 to 30th in the world. and we were
Oh,
going to
wow.
nationals, and just the landscape of pickleball was newer. And
It is.
so kind of be at that point where it's like, wow, we could really make some hay. And then a lot of my friends who I think are a little bit better than I am were able to get contracts and agreements that are making it an actual profession now. Whereas 5 or 6 years ago, you couldn't really make it profitable unless you were the number one pickleball player in the world. Just a grieving process of letting go of that pipe dream of being a professional and embracing the I'm a dad and husband and have a lot of incredible therapists I work with at our clinic, and just that shift of really kind of a junction point, I guess.
Would you say that's a facet of life of letting go of something that you love for something different that happens often in life?
For sure. Yeah, I think we'll probably talk about this later, but I think that's when people come to therapy is
Hmm.
they're grieving something, even if it's a positive thing. I think becoming a parent is a good example of that. It's such a wonderful, amazing thing. And there's a loss of free time and extra money or whatever it may be. So, yeah, I think we're in a constant state of grief and change, and allowing ourselves to let go and embrace rather than cling and hold on to what was. But it's difficult, though. Even if it's a positive thing, there's still grief involved.
So, how do people usually cope with that grief?
I think letting go is a great way you described it, being able to not hold on to the past. I think talking about it is super helpful. I think having something new to really embrace and focus on helps with that movement going forward. And I think acknowledging that sometimes it sucks, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we want to not admit that it's hard or not admit that, oh, it's not really that big a deal, the thing that I'm grieving. But man, if somebody has a dream that a true dream that they're having to let die or let go, you got to honor it. You got to acknowledge that's I almost feel like greatest showman to have a dream to make something become a reality and to embrace a new thing. I just think honor how challenging that can be.
Do you feel like it's ever useful to hold on to something instead of letting it go?
Hold on, yes. Cling to, no.
Okay. Tell me the difference.
So I think holding on to, if we're talking about grief in the typical sense, holding on to the memories of the loved ones, holding on to the wonderful times of the past, going back to pickleball, or holding on to the friendships and the memories and the competition and the anger and the some of the paddle throws and some of the just fierce moments of competition, remembering all the wonderfulness that it is and embracing it, but not clinging to it to the point where I don't have a hand to reach out to a new endeavor, a new adventure. It's maybe is how I would describe the difference of those two.
Is it harder to let go of those things when it's taken from you, like in the loss of life, or maybe you have an injury and so you can't play the sport the way you used to play it? Or is it harder to let go of something gradually, like a sport that I didn't get injured, but I just can't play that way, or whatever the case is?
Statistically, the one that's taken from you, death in particular, I think is statistically the hardest thing we go through because of the finality of it. It's just brutal,
Hmm.
but we often don't lament what we could have done to prevent it. So I think other grief, let's say, for example, a divorce, I think there's a complexity to divorce that maybe is unique to divorce that isn't present if somebody passes away or if it was just taken away from us outside of our control, because we don't wonder, how could I have avoided this? Or an injury, for example, maybe there is some complexity to that if somebody's really looking in how they could have prevented the injury. But I think when it involves aspects of ourselves, I think there's just a complexity and an additional difficulty in getting through grief when we're wondering what part did we have to play in it, versus what was just taken away from us.
Well, I can see that when it's outside of yourself versus something that you identify as or with.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
interesting.
It would be embarrassing to think, man, I'm grieving this situation in my life more than somebody passing away. I guess I would just say they're just different. They're different types of grief. They're different types of suffering. And then if we really want to make ourselves miserable, let's compare our griefs or our grief to one another. With somebody who passed away due to cancer, is that grief worse than this other type of grief or a different way somebody passed away? And I like to honor it all as sacred and valid, and all of it's difficult.
Yeah. As we get into this subject, and we have been talking about the world of intentionality, and maybe in the vein of loss or grief or something that's taken away, tell me a little more about in your practice, where does intentionality come to play? How do you learn from it? What's on your mind around it?
Yeah, I remember a lot of therapists have a subconscious question that they're asking. Some will even, before starting a session, will say to the person, "What's your intention today?" Or "What's my intention as the listener?" Well, sometimes you can make those covert intentions overt, and you can really know, like, "Hey, I'm really here to learn this particular thing," or "I think I'm just here just to vent about the things that are stressing me out." And then you're more likely to be on the same page when you know somebody's intention. Some people hide their intentions, but I think overall, I think I'm most intentional about how can I connect with this person. And a lot of that goes into what's called attachment theory, if you wanted to have a discussion about attachment theory. But a lot of it is, how can I connect with this person? How can I understand this person? How can I support this person? And I think one thing that I like to think of is, how can I help this person see themselves in the way that I see them, or that someone outside of them would see them, which is typically in a more kind of amazing light than maybe what they're experiencing within themselves.
Okay, we have a lot of listeners that aren't necessarily therapists, but at the same token, I think it's fascinating that you set up your conversations, or at least you said therapists, so it might not be, I hope you're talking about the way you do it, is
Yes.
set it up with an intention of what's your intention for the person that you're working with, and then even yourself having an intention around what conversation is. And you went deeper and said, look, it's this wanting them to see themselves as I see themselves. Why is that useful to have that in your mind as you're having your sessions or conversations?
One of the aspects that a lot of people will go to before they'll go to therapy is the self-help world, right? If I can order these 10 books from Amazon, or if I can read this book about Atomic Habits, which is a great book. Haven't read it, but I've heard a lot of people talk
Oh,
about
it's one of my favorites. Mine is one of my favorites, dude.
Every morning, my wife's like, "Have you read Atomic Habits yet?" I'm like, "You can just say it, I've done the dishes." Like, you can just be more straightforward with it if you'd like. But I think the concept is, there's some research with regards to how our brains are wired that self-help is a little bit of a misnomer, that it actually is through the relationship, through the interaction with another person, that will lift us up to places that we couldn't get on our own. And so I think acknowledging, there's one theory, even with regards to Alcoholics Anonymous, the first step is acknowledging that there's a higher being. But another way of saying that is to admit that I'm not God. And so I think there is a definite level of humility in both the sharer and the listener, and selfishly, or a side effect of being a therapist is, it's also lifted me up with regards to my perceptions and going on these joint journeys with people. But I think that intentionality about connecting, and one other therapist talked about how the main thing therapists or friends or parents, or even if people aren't therapists, we all have sacred relationships that we're a part of, that the thing that we can offer somebody is hope.
Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying this episode, please subscribe, follow, and download our episode. Your support allows us to bring more intentional guests just like this, and it means the world to us. Now, let's get back to the episode. That makes sense. I've always come into conversations, when I look at this work of intentionality, a conversation to me, there should be intent. So it rings on my ears as something that's useful for you or anybody that's going to be listening or working with somebody to have an intention. And do you see that there are, like you said, that they see themselves as you see them or as how you see them? Are there other intentions that you think are useful to have as you go into a conversation or a session?
Yeah, I think the number one for me, I did jot down a few of these actually, hoping that you might ask that question. But for me, first,
I didn't prep that question by any means.
didn't prep it, just on the same wavelength. It's feeling right. For me, the first and foremost is some sort of gratitude. Thank you is probably the most common thing I say in therapy or if I'm in an intentional type of conversation, because I always say comedians are craving laughs, therapists or human beings are craving connection. And the concept is no connection can happen without the presence of gratitude in some form. Grateful for somebody sharing with me, grateful for somebody listening. And so gratitude is probably the first and foremost intentionality that I have or that I'm trying to cultivate, both in my professional life as well as in my personal life or day-to-day living.
Well, on that note, how does that come out then? Because there's internal intentions that don't always come out of our mouths, but it's the way that we are around it. How do you express that in a conversation?
One of the things I think a lot of people are looking for conversationally, whether that's in therapy or in a podcast or in a car ride with your teenage child or whatever it is, some sort of connection. And sometimes people will share hurt or pain, or they've been through this really difficult thing. And it's really fascinating. Any guesses of what the most common thing somebody says when they share pain and suffering?
I definitely have some thoughts around that. I don't know if I'll be on par with everybody else's thoughts, but if you tell me I have this pain, I feel like a lot of people will share a similar pain. Like, oh, you broke your wrist. Oh, I broke my wrist too, Mike. I remember that. That's how I experienced it. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I experienced.
Yes. And for me, that'd be a funny Saturday Night Live skit, is the one-upping therapist. Right.
There you go.
I went through a divorce. Well, my divorce was way worse than your divorce. Right. And so, I mean, it's comical because we all know that wouldn't be a great response therapeutically. Right. So yeah, people definitely, and I think the intention behind that is positive because they're trying to connect, they're trying to relate. It just shifts the focus from the person who shared away, which can be a very painful, disconnecting experience. The other, probably most common thing that I hear is people say, I'm sorry. Hey, I'm so sorry that you went through that. But my experience is people tend to, what do people say when we say we're sorry?
It's okay.
No, it's okay. It's not that big a deal. You literally just told me the most devastating thing I've heard in a long time. I say, I'm so sorry. And then you recoil away saying that's not that big a deal. Right.
Yeah.
So for me, how I respond to vulnerability or pain or suffering is thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being open with me. Thank you. And it's fascinating that connection seems to be really felt, really bonding, a shared experience. Because if I say I'm sorry, it's almost like people interpret it as pity. I don't think that's the intention, but they interpret it that you're pitying them and people don't want to be pitied. And when I say thank you, I'm on the same level.
That's awesome. I'm just thinking of a person that I know, and maybe this person will listen and think maybe I'm talking about them. But I know a person that's like what you said is when I've heard people share something that's either really intimate or really heavy for them, whether it's a pain or not. This is a big deal. And the person's like, yeah, me too. Or yeah, I've done that. Or, oh, I know a person that had that happen. And you don't actually even know how this is. You just know some other 5 people away from you person that went through this thing. And that's how you're relating with me. I almost cringe every time I hear it. It's like, So you use gratitude to deepen the connection. What other mechanisms do you do to communicate well and have an intention then?
There's a few others. I haven't thought about what you were saying there. Just as a side note, another way people try to convey empathy is they'll say something like, "Oh, I know exactly how you feel,"
Oh,
or "I have, oh man, there's somebody else that went through that same thing." So fascinatingly, admitting that I don't understand conveys more genuine empathy. It's like, hey, I can't even imagine what you're going through. Even if you've been through something somewhat similar, we don't really know what people are going through. And so I just wanted to kind of add that because I think that, again, the intention in all of these examples is positive. It's just, it is so excruciatingly painful when, again, it's about connection. So, oh, somebody else felt that, or mine was harder, or I know exactly what you're feeling. Leave somebody not feeling as honored. Or one thing that I love people to say is, I really feel seen right now. I really feel understood right now. I feel really heard and accepted right now. That's, again, getting a big laugh for a comedian. And so on that train of thought, I think another thing that I'm intentional about,
well,
and it's a
let
little
me
bit,
hold you up. Let me hold you up because I like the vein we're in. I find that in those conversations, when people do what you've outlined, the person that is the sharer, that's sharing the thing, they'll shut down, but they don't really know why. I'm experiencing you and I having similar situations where we're listening to people talk and we're like, ooh, ah, ee. I'm not judging it, but it's like, oh man, you could have seen so much more out of that person had you not responded like that. But the person that shares shuts down, but they don't know why. They don't, sometimes they feel offended or feel like, this guy's a jerk. Or that's
right.
true. And I see most times they just stop talking, and the person that was the listener that became the interrupter, now they don't know where to go in the conversation. It's awkward pause. And you told me something really big, and I told you that I know exactly how you feel. And now the conversation dies. And I think that's such a shame in our lives, because as you get deeper down that path, that's when you actually learn what's going on for people, because most of what people share is like the surface. Like you ask, hey, how you doing? You just lost this person in your life. It's like, yeah, it's been hard. That's the easy out. And they're saying it honestly, but it's the first layer. It's like, yeah, it's hard. And then you share, yeah, I've been through that too. And then they're like, I'm done now. I'm not going to share anymore. But they don't know why they're not sharing anymore. They're just not.
Right.
Do you see that too?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, as you were saying that, you said it's a shame. And I think it actually is shame that what they're feeling.
Hmm.
They're not feeling important. They're not feeling seen. They're not feeling connected. Brene Brown defines shame as this kind of deep down thought that we're not enough, and that sucks to feel, but then not worthy of love and connection. When you are in that vulnerable state and you do go a few layers down, now your worth is on the line, or now your importance is on the line, or these feelings these treasures that you have. And maybe that's something about, I love using religious metaphor, symbolism from all different cultures, but that pearl was not appreciated. And then it can be internalized and of course, it's probably disappointment or rejection or disconnection would probably be another word I would use. But yeah, definitely. It becomes hard to get them to open up again. Some therapists would theorize that it's traumatic to really open up and to be in your most vulnerable state, have somebody see you and then keep walking, or unintentionally, or sometimes intentionally, but not be able to see the pain and suffering in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I find that's the value of relationships, is that when you go deep, and there are people that won't let you go, they don't want to go in there. And I'm not talking of your profession, just in general. There are sometimes you have a conversation with someone, they're like, yeah, I don't want to go down this path with you. I don't want to share anything more with you. And that's fine. But I find that more people will actually go with you than won't, if you're willing to listen and open up and respond as you have. I'm fascinated with just the first bullet point we're talking about here. What else do you do in your conversations that's useful? You said you had a list.
Can I ask you one of yours?
One of the things that I do in conversations.
So I guess I was curious, what I was gathering from you is your genuine nature. I think you seem to be just very genuine, and you're able to to bring forth this genuine caring seems like something that you bring forth. That's actually something, ironically, that I kind of battle. I want to go to humor, or I want to go to story, or I want to go to other things, but it seems like you seem very and in other situations, I don't. If I'm in a therapy session, I definitely am more as genuine as I can possibly be. But it just seems like you're very comfortable just really showing genuine care for people. Maybe that's part of why you get it more often.
Let me share the result real quickly. Because of what I'll say, it allows me to feel way closer to people than without it. So that's like kind of the result. And that's what you said, like the comedian gets laughs. Like that's what fuels the effort to do what I'll tell you. Because for me, I can't say that I've always been this way. I have tendencies. I have like who I am. And I don't think that I've changed 180, but I think that I've worked diligently to change some things about myself.
Mm.
And there's two things. It is holding back, but I'm holding back for what I think internally is the right reasons, because there are times when people have shared things with me and then a flood of like stories of things that have come that I've done or that has happened in my life or my family's life or my wife's life. And I'm like a dam, like holding those things back because those aren't useful. Because typically, if someone asks, Bryan, have you been through something similar? Dude, I'll share it all. If they want to know, I'm all in. But I don't want to share so much that they're like, oh, this isn't about you, dude. This is my stuff over here. So there is an active like withholding of things in my brain that like those quick pop in thoughts of like, yeah, that's one. And then two, it's been a trained skill to be curious. Like when someone says something, the way they say it, the words they use, I'm like, I sometimes say like, why'd you use that word? And that sometimes catches people off. So I've had to not say that way because they're like, well, what do you care about what word I'm using? No, I'm just, it's about you. It's not about the word, but I'm actually curious about what's happening that I don't know. Cause I have to believe I don't know. When I walk into a conversation, even with my wife, with my kids, people that I interact with every single day, I have to believe I don't know. Otherwise, I'm already off. I'm already lost.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I do it, Mike. Yeah.
That's awesome. I think similar to comedians, as there's funny people everywhere and there's therapists everywhere. A caring, loving parent, a best friend. My description of a therapist is as a professional friend, somebody that's a model of secure friendship and attachment. And people are even hesitant to share even when they walk into a therapy office. I thought just by having my licensure on the door would open up and clear out all the defensiveness and vulnerability that people would have, but it's still an earned thing over time. And I love that. What do you do with the holding back? Do you have a different outlet, or do you just kind of let it go once the time's passed?
Typically, I'm fine because I know they're just my stories and I lived them. I've gone through them. So it's not like sharing them. I didn't get some reciprocation. I'm okay. Like I lived it. I'm good. If they ask, then I'll give it. But and that's the marketer in me as well. I don't want to just send everybody emails. No, if you said, hey, I want to get an email from you, then I'll send you one. And then there's something there as opposed to being like, we all get emails in our inbox like, I didn't ask for this. So that's kind of my methodology is they didn't ask for it. Why am I sharing it? To some extent. I mean, there's relatability, but I still think that it's better not to share than to share. Yeah.
If someone asks, they're more likely open to hear it versus just
yeah. And I still battle. I still share too much on occasion. I'm not like, if anybody knows me is listening to this, they're like, well, he doesn't always listen. That's true. But that's my intent. Yeah.
Well, I think it's just such a dance. When I started as a therapist, I wouldn't share anything. Like it was my ideal therapy session, what I thought, and this was when I was new into the field, I thought it was 99% listening and 1% talking because I really just wanted it to be all about them. But interestingly, that's probably the closest I've come to feeling burnt out. I think I was only holding back to the point where the connection probably wasn't happening as significantly as I was wanting. And then, of course, that would be another Saturday Night Live skit, the therapist that talks all the time.
Uh-huh. There you
You
go.
know, there's other SNL skits I have in my mind at all times. The barely coping therapist is pretty funny to me.
The barely coping therapy. You got to tell me what that
Like
is.
the one that's just hanging by a thread. He's got like a
Oh,
flask in the drawers, like, hey, oh,
yeah,
man,
yeah,
that sounds tough. I think that one's
yeah.
kind of funny. But yeah, so it did shift over time. I still think it's probably not necessarily appropriate to be one-upping or over-talking somebody who's sharing in a vulnerable way. But I think you do have to bring some of yourself in order to be able to empathize and connect. Maybe we don't share the story, but be willing to be vulnerable enough as a listener. Sometimes we think vulnerability is just talking, but it's also really vulnerable to really listen and explore the emotions we're feeling and stories that it brings up as people are sharing. But gotta be honest.
I think there's a little difference between your role and just a regular person role. As a therapist, there's a mantle, there's something that's figured out in that space. And so there's some biases coming into it, positive and negative, but either way. Whereas a normal person, I find that in conversation, if I dig deep enough and the person's willing to go there with me, there's usually a question like, well, why do you ask? And then it's, oh, well, I'll tell you, I've done that or whatever it is. So it gets to that point, but they're not as, I mean, hopefully they're just sharing everything they can with you, but
Yeah.
they're not as guarded because it's like, this guy's not a therapist. I don't know. It's a little easier for me, I think.
No, I think it's a great point because I'll still ask, hey, do you mind me asking about this vulnerable part of your life? Do you mind me asking about how often you're drinking or what you're drinking? Or do you mind me asking about your sex life? And people typically are like, well, that's why I'm here. That's not something you'd bring up at a dinner party. Like,
Yeah.
hey, do you mind me asking how often you're getting plastered on the weekends? But yeah, I think you're right. There is an inherent difference, but I'm still trying to be sensitive before I ask a question. And some of that I think is to try to reduce defensiveness. You know, you mentioned intentionality. I think a lot of my intentionality is to try to help people feel comfortable and safe to share what they need to share. So,
So let's talk quickly about that is how do they, what is inherent in what you do that makes them feel comfortable to share?
I think my sweater. I'm really intentional about what type of couch and what type of sweater I wear.
This is not a joke. You're shooting me straight here.
Sometimes with jokes, I don't know if I'm being serious or not, but I think everything about my office is set up for that. I think to what type of light bulb I have in the overhead lighting, or what type of lamp, or do I want to have a plant in here? What distance is my chair from the couch? The way I set up the furniture, all of that is definitely with that intention in mind, for sure.
Yeah.
So definitely not joking about that. I just haven't thought about it as much until you asked me, like, are you being serious? I'm like, I think I am actually being serious.
That's awesome. I actually really love that all those elements are a factor. It doesn't have to be a factor you're thinking about every single time, but it was intention driven decision. I don't know how much fun you get to have or not. I'm hoping you get to have fun, but are there patients where you can pull the chair up like 1 inch from the couch before they get there and they're kind of like, what the heck is, you can kind of joke with that? Like I've gone too far.
No, I think people notice it. People notice because it's a very controlled environment. So if I do change, one thing that I do change is how my books are ordered, just so that, again, I am intentional because it is a display. So if I'm meeting with a couple, I may want them to see that there are books about intimacy there. Or if I'm meeting with someone who's working on sports psychology, I want them to see the sports psychology, the inner game of tennis, the Kobe Bryant book, the whatever, just to know that there is some sort of awareness or familiarity with what we're discussing. It's probably on some sort of subconscious level, but yeah, they'll notice. I don't tend to prank people.
Yeah, not like a prank, but more like you can throw in some jokes there.
So the second one on my list is humor, and I am intentional about it. And so in that type of scenario, if they were to notice that, I'm like, well, guess we don't need to go through the rest of the criteria of your diagnosis or things like that. But no, I don't think I'm that fastidious about like tiny little adjustments, but I would say we laugh in my therapy sessions. We laugh equally as much as we cry.
There you go. That
And
seems healthy. I mean, that seems healthy to me.
yeah, most people I think are a little bit surprised. One of my favorite comments people will say is, therapy wasn't as terrible as I thought it would be. It's like little Mikey inside of me just starts just grinning from ear to ear because it wasn't this excruciatingly terrible, awful experience, whether we were talking about joys or pains. So yeah, I love laughing. And so we talked about gratitude being a bonding tool. I forget who did the TED talk, but it was a pretty famous one about how laughing is a bonding ritual. And so if you can laugh with somebody, you've got some level of comfort with them.
Yeah.
And defenses go down with laughter. I'm intentional about self-deprecating humor. I think I have a strong sense of self. Maybe I don't, but I could poke fun at myself. And I think that allows people to realize that they don't have to take themselves so seriously either.
Yeah. As you're speaking, I'm thinking of some of those moments when I've laughed with a friend or my wife or somebody else. And yeah, those are super impactful. Even if I don't remember exactly the moment, it just definitely mattered a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you have one come to mind?
Yeah, there's times where my wife and I are just like crying, laughing, and those are some of my favorite times. And they're like usually because I'm being an idiot or something. But yeah, those are great times. They definitely make a huge difference in my life.
And I think that it's bonding, and also because with crying, there's like this visceral experience, and obviously tears and sometimes sweat are coming out. But the same with laughter. Like it can be so therapeutic to share in a laugh with somebody. Like those are the best, just the uncontrollable laughter. And it's a unique person probably that you can just let go to that extent, with A, being an idiot, and then also being, and that's fine. You're not worried about what they're thinking or feeling. We can laugh. And yeah, those are fun moments for sure.
Yeah. Well, Mike, what's next on your list with gratitude and humor being the top two?
I think metaphor and storytelling are a way to really connect with people and bond with people. Play. I think we talked about pickleball, but I don't think I had made. Go ahead.
I don't know how to go through things fast on this show, dude. So metaphor, how do you incorporate metaphor into your conversations? I can understand it as a therapist, and that's still valuable to our conversation, but how do you fit that in?
It's like when you're feeling connected, it's just this joyful thing. But when a metaphor emerges into a conversation, I nerd out like you wouldn't believe. Like the joy that I have when a metaphor comes into the room is just, I could stay with it and talk about it and explore it until the other person is just like, okay, it's time to move on conversationally.
But you say it as if it organically grows out of this conversation. A metaphor just comes out of the. Tell me, give me an example. Put our feet on the ground here.
Let's see here. So as I'm thinking about that, the concept would be there, and I think a lot of writers use this concept. We studied it in school and it didn't make a lot of sense to me, but there's this concept of gestalt. It's this underlying symbol or image that um, that is just, so essentially we use words verbally, right? And so I think a lot of times we're subconsciously describing the metaphor. We're describing the deeper feeling or concept, and we're doing the best we can to describe it. So whether it's in everyday conversation or in therapy, to me, that's like the therapy realm or the bonding realm. So for example, we talked about grief a little bit earlier. Hey, most of the time when people ask about grief, they'll ask about how somebody else is doing. Like, hey, Bryan, how's your wife doing? Well, how am I doing also? You could ask her if you would like to. It seems like a question for her. And usually people would be like, oh, well, it's that first level you were talking about, right? So you're doing okay. He's doing good. He's doing okay. He's doing fine. And then you get to, how are you really doing? And then they'll say something like, well, it feels like I've had this puppy that I've loved so much and that I've spent time engaging with. And we would go and we'd go on walks together and play fetch together. And then I woke up one morning and that puppy's gone. And then all of a sudden the chills, like I have the chills right now, even talking about it, to where it's like, wow. And I don't know entirely why that feels more bonding or even more understood than if we said, I miss my mom or I miss this person that I've lost. But when it gets into the metaphor, symbolic realm, it just takes on this additional layer of complexity that maybe we don't even know how to describe. But yeah, once a metaphor comes into the room, it's this sharing in the experience. And then the fascinating thing is it's unique to that bond, that moment. So if the next conversation I have with somebody about grief is they've lost somebody, I'm like, oh, is it like a puppy dog that they kind of used to hang out with? They're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I don't even know what you're talking about. So it's just this unique symbol. So I think in Christianity, I'm not any sort of like spiritual guru or anything like that, but I think Jesus says it to the effect of like, where two or more people are gathered in my name, there I will be also. I view that as that symbol or that archetype or that metaphor that emerges when people gather with intention. And then it's like this joint symbol that people can bond or connect about. And then I've also been trained in a particular process that's more likely and more conducive for a symbol to emerge, which I feel grateful for.
Well, thanks for sharing. I think that's useful. And I'm seeing how it does come out when people are trying to describe how they feel or how this thing was. It doesn't always come out in metaphor, but I can see why that would make a difference in the conversation if it does.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll typically ask a question until it emerges.
Oh, okay.
Because people, as they're trying to describe things, eventually they will go to comparisons. So, like, they have a teenager that they're concerned about what friends they're going to hang out with or the girl they want to date or something like that. And then all of a sudden they're saying things like, it just feels like a train that if it gets off the track, it's going to lead to an explosion. And it's like, oh, and it's also a non-threatening way to talk about something. So it's like, oh, well, how do you slow down a train? Or what do you do if a train gets off the tracks? And then if we believe, because I think sometimes we believe in the metaphor, if it's limiting, there's no way to solve it. But if we find some sort of subconscious way that we can alter the metaphor, then in our real life, we can then apply some sort of pragmatic solution to it. But one other example that comes to mind is someone was looking for a job and they said it felt like they were in a huge sports stadium without a microphone because they're going to job fairs. It's like, oh, well, how could you be heard? So if nobody can hear you, you go to a smaller room, you get a megaphone, paraglide in and make a grand entrance. And then once they realize that there are ways to be heard, then maybe they can have trust or hope that they can go about it a different way.
Yeah, I love that. And I think if those that are listening, if you have a conversation that hits a metaphor, that's a good sign, it sounds like. So that you can take Mike's stamp of approval on that conversation. That's good. I like it.
Feel the joy of it. I don't know why I
There
love
you
it
go.
so much, but it's just like, oh, it's the realm I love being in.
The win. That's good.
Yeah.
What else is on your mind as we go through our conversation here in the next little bit?
I think play is another thing that is very bonding. I'm intentional about prioritizing play. I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but I hadn't really met anybody new. I was so lucky. All growing up, I always had a best friend. From the day I was born until currently, I've always had somebody that is just a best friend. I'm so lucky that way. And I attribute so much of it to my somewhat decent hand-eye coordination. Because that's how you make friends on the playground as a kid. It's like, hey, can you kick a soccer ball? I can kick a soccer ball too. Like, cool. You want to be friends? Yeah, let's be teammates. Let's spend the next 18 years together. That sounds good. I think that play was a huge part of making meaningful friendships and being part of teams. And, of course, sports are the only way to play. And I think it's so cool that there are so many different ways to get into that state of being with other people now. Still wish it was a little bit more with other things, not just football. But I think in my early 20s, I kind of was stagnant. I think it was the combination of getting married and just early 20s were just stressful for me. And so once pickleball happened, it's like the floodgates opened because I think that pickleball is a state of play. Of course, it does get to competition, but next thing I know, I'm making new friends and we're hanging out and spending time together, just like when I was a kid. I think play is something I'm intentional about in, yes, making new friendships or trying to maintain friendships that I've already established.
Okay, so play being an element of being intentional or about like how we interact with people. How's that connect for you?
Do you mind asking that again?
Yeah. So as we've been talking about like conversations and relationships, you talk about play being an element. And the way I heard you say it is more around like going out and doing something physical or mental, an activity, whether it's competing or not, but it's playing.
Yeah.
How that's created good relationships. Is that where we're at? I'm trying to help me connect those dots a little bit.
So I think I did a little tangent there with actual play. I think with regards to conversation, I think that's where the humor comes
Yeah.
in to play, unintended. I think lightheartedness and joking, and it's like typically I'm in this office, but I mean I have a couple of Nerf balls in here that I'll throw back and forth with people. I used to have a basketball hoop that we can play horse and bond that way. Previously in my career, I did in-home therapy, and so we would go and actually play basketball. I think it was Aristotle. 1 hour of play with somebody reveals more than something of conversation.
Oh yeah.
You get to know somebody more through an hour of play than conversation, which sounds like an indictment on talk therapy, but I still think it's all about bonding and connecting. Play's a supercharged way to make a bond.
Oh,
Conversationally, there still has to be some sort of playfulness, but there are also things you can do in a therapy office that are more conducive to like a play state that helps people to open up and connect.
got it. So play within the conversation can be fun within the conversation, but also doing something playful can also reveal and make connections with people in a different way. I see value in that, and it's clearer to me now. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think it's probably correlated to that humor thing, right?
Hmm.
Where it's just this shared experience. One tiny little thing I wanted to mention is all of this loops back to a theory that is pretty important to me, which is attachment theory.
Okay.
So, attachment theory is basically that we have this system within us that is in charge of survival and mood regulation. And that's from the day we're born to the day we die. And so you have to attach with your primary caregiver in order to survive. If we're feeling disconnected or lonely in our lives, it is a survival aspect of things. And I think sadly, that's why so many people are suffering silently, or when suicidal ideation or things of that nature come up, where my mind goes is that person needs to feel connected. And so once we feel connected, we feel secure and safe, and then we can regulate our mood. And so when we talk about gratitude to connect, humor to connect, storytelling and metaphor to connect, play to connect, it really is a survival thing. If we're feeling connected, we feel safe and secure. And then that's also how we manage emotions. And I do a little bit of couples therapy,
Mhm.
and the fireworks can go off because if they're trying to connect and they're feeling disconnected, it really does seem life or death. Anyway, that was just one other kind of theory or concept I wanted to at least float out there.
Yeah, I've never read into the attachment theory, but I've heard people explain it like you have to give some understanding. And it makes sense. When I recognize there are people that feel like they're introverts, that's fine. But introverts still connect with human beings. They're just smaller groups of them. And
Right.
I think sometimes we believe that, oh, I can do it by myself. But the lonelier you are, typically the less healthy you are, at minimum mentally, maybe even physically. So I definitely believe that the attachment theory that you've stated in the way you've stated it makes a lot of sense, that we need people to make this life worthwhile. I think that's the only way life is worthwhile is
Yeah.
with people. If it was just like a planet of one person, oh man,
Yeah.
no thanks. I'm not signing up for that one.
Yeah. I had an awkward experience at work one time with what you just said. They were talking about what would you do if there was a zombie apocalypse, and everybody's giving their answers and not really thinking things through. I said, I'd probably jump off a cliff. And everybody's like, oh, is he okay? Is he doing okay? But it's like, oh, it's just without relationships, it's not a life worth living for me.
That rings true for me too. If there's not people around, not that I need to be in control of all the people by any stretch, just if there's no connection and no relationship, not worth it.
Yeah, exactly.
Mike, I don't know that we got through all of your list, but that gives us opportunity to have you back on. But tell me, what would you want people to know as we wrap it up?
I think be grateful for what you have in your life. It sounds cheesy, it sounds superficial, but spend time thinking about why you're grateful for it. And then take that next step of vulnerability and call them and tell them, or express it in a sincere, open way. And you'll enhance your current relationships, and then you'll build new ones. I genuinely feel grateful. Devin Anderson wanted me to he wanted to be part of the podcast, but he's our mutual setup here. But I was really grateful that he connected us, and I feel grateful to get to know you better. I think I'm usually a listener more than I am a talker. So I feel grateful to be able to at least get some of this. You talked about the dam that you hold back. It's kind of what I do for a living, is hold back. And so I feel grateful for the chance to hopefully share something that could help somebody listening, and grateful to get to know you better, and wish you the best with everything you're doing and your family.
Well, I think that if people that are listening can take what you've said in the bullet points you put out there regarding conversations and relationships, and we can put that into a daily perspective and put that in even in your next conversation. Just try to do one of the things that Mike brought up. I think you'll have a better relationship with that person, at least for that minute or 5 minutes you're talking with them. So give it a shot. I'm just certainly grateful, Mike, to be able to have you on the show today. And I'm certain that we'll have a lot of questions, and we'll maybe be able to get back on here and answer some of those questions.
Sounds great. Anytime.
All right. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on The Intentional Way. I'm Bryan Hatch, and it's been a true privilege to share this time with you. If today's episode has inspired you in any way, shape, or form, please subscribe, follow, and download our episodes. Your support not only helps us grow, it also enables us to bring more insightful conversations and exceptional guests right to you. Living intentionally begins with a single step, yours. So let's make the most of it. Until next time, seek intention by being completely present.